Hi everyone, Martin Bamford here, and in this video, two scenarios for the impact of the Omicron variant on the global economy, supply chains and price inflation. The Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD, has issued a warning that Western governments could need to introduce new emergency financial support measures for both businesses and individuals. That's if, and it's a big if at the moment, the Omicron variant leads to a significant global economic slowdown. More of these Omicron cases are being identified daily. And of course, we're now all familiar with the concept of exponential growth when it comes to this pandemic. South Africa, where scientists first identified Omicron, has said it's become the dominant variant there, leading to a surge of COVID-19 cases, almost doubling in the past 24 hours to 8,500 new daily infections. The World Health Organization, WHO, says Omicron has been identified in at least 24 countries, now including India, Ghana, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. As I mentioned in my video about a week ago, there's still lots of unknowns when it comes to Omicron. We don't yet know if this is more transmissible than the Delta variant, although the spread we're starting to see in South Africa suggests that it might well be. We don't yet know if it's more dangerous than Delta, leading to more hospitalizations, more deaths, and we don't yet know if existing vaccinations are less effective against Omicron. But we do know that the WHO has categorized it as a variant of concern and said that early evidence, only early evidence mind you, suggests that there is a higher risk of reinfection. But back to this warning from the OECD, who say that a renewed wave of the pandemic could add to the existing strain on the world economy from persistently high levels of price inflation. That's because if Omicron turns out to be more transmissible than Delta or more resistant to existing vaccines, it could make the existing global supply chain crisis worse and therefore drive prices up for a prolonged period. And if it takes an even more severe turn, governments could be forced to reimpose lockdown restrictions and place further restrictions on international travel, slowing down economic activity as we saw right back in the early days of a pandemic last year. But of course, less consumer demand and less economic activity could help to bring down price inflation. So these are the two worst case scenarios being considered by the OECD: bad news and higher prices, or really bad news and slower economic growth. Lawrence Boone, chief economist of the OECD, explained that Omicron is adding to the uncertainty out there as the global economy recovers from the pandemic. Talking about these two scenarios, she said, one is where it creates more supply disruptions and prolongs higher inflation for longer, and one is more severe and we have to use more mobility restrictions, in which case demand could decline and inflation could actually recede much faster than what we have here. Boone said that if Omicron turned out to be more evil than other COVID variants, governments could be forced to provide more emergency financial support for businesses and households, saying that could be a scenario where we need more fiscal support at this stage. The latest Economic Outlook report from the OECD presents a fairly decent picture for the global economy, continuing its recovery from previous lockdowns. But previous recovery momentum has eased and is becoming more imbalanced. One reason for this global imbalance is a failure of Western governments to ensure rapid and effective vaccination in third world countries, a failure that could come with a high price, especially as new COVID variants like Omicron are identified. Presenting this Outlook report, Boone also explained that the G20 nations, the wealthiest countries in the world, they've already spent around $10 trillion since the onset of the pandemic, providing emergency financial support. However, it would only cost $50 billion to ensure a global vaccination program. She said the news about the Omicron variant may actually be a reminder of how short-sighted that failure has been. We're spending to support our economies while we're failing to vaccinate the whole world. As a result, the world really is not looking better. The OECD is forecasting global GDP growth at 5.6% this year, then 4.5% next year, 2022. In 2023, the global economy is forecast to grow at 3.2%. That's back towards the sort of trend levels we saw pre-pandemic. We know that these economic forecasts always need to be taken with a pinch of salt, especially forecasts further out, where unexpected factors can quickly derail progress. Inflation is clearly a growing concern for central banks and governments. Earlier this week, US Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell was talking about an earlier than expected withdrawal of emergency pandemic stimulus measures, and we know the Bank of England is expected to hike interest rates at their Monetary Policy Committee when it takes place later this month. But that likelihood of a rate hike here in the UK, that's diminished a bit thanks to the uncertainty now introduced by Omicron. The OECD Outlook report is forecasting inflation in 2022 at 4.4%, up from its previous forecast in September of inflation at 3.9% next year. The US and the UK are predicted to lead the charge when it comes to higher prices, with inflation at 3.1% in the US and 4.4% in the UK next year. But Boone thinks the wait-and-see approach adopted to date by the central banks is the right one, saying, faced with supply bottlenecks and where overall demand is not excessive, the best central banks can do is actually to signal that they will act if the pressure continues to increase. But it is for companies and governments to address the bottlenecks. Which of these two scenarios from the OECD do you think is most likely to materialise over the coming months? If either, do let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching this video. Make sure you press that subscribe button. Until next time, I'm Martin Bamford, and remember, when it comes to your money, the more you know, the faster it can grow.